all, and welcome back to another episode of There's Danger Here. I'm Leilani,
And I'm Sam.
and today we are going to the Wayback Times.
The Wayback
Yes,
Times.
and this is also not an American case, so I am going to apologize in advance for trying to say names.
Oh, I love the struggle that you have with them, though.
Yeah,
It's much better than I would do, I'm sure.
it's a struggle sometimes.
Are they German names?
Mm-mm.
Because that's where you say you typically struggle the most.
I struggle with all of the foreign
Okay.
names, okay?
All right.
It's all of them. All right, here we go. Martin Dumollard was born to parents Pierre and Marie Josephette Ray in 1809. His father Pierre was known in Hungary as Pierre de Mola, who was of nobility. Unfortunately, prior to meeting Marie, Pierre was stripped of his power when the Austrian Empire formed. So, like I said, Wayback Times.
Wayback Times.
Pierre, along with others, attempted to reassert Hungarian power in the empire, including taking part in a failed assassination plot of the Emperor Franz Joseph. As those who took part were executed for their crimes, Pierre fled, moving west, eventually landing in, France. It's a French name. Salines-les. Oh, it's not. It looks like Thermes. It's Thermes. I can't say it.
Just say it with an accent.
I have
The maze.
no accent, okay? In the southeast of France. There he was a peasant, making his way in life by using his past knowledge of trade and commerce, helping local merchants as their accountant. It was here that he met Marie. For a time, the family lived peacefully. When Martin turned 3, the family grew. Raymond was born, and the family moved to Dagno. I hope that's how you say it. It's probably not, but I like the way it's said.
It sounds great.
In search of a larger home for the growing family. Listen, somebody listening to this is going to be like, you are the worst. I'm like, I can't even say U.S. cities. I don't know what you want. I've listened to all their names. Can't say them. Sorry, guys. Sorry.
Should we just have like a little
Should we disclaimer?
Google recording every time we need to say it? Like,
yeah.
their maze.
Yeah. Make it sound beautiful. In this new village, two things happened and started another altering course for Martin in his life. First, he became the town bully and thief, stealing almost anything he could and fighting with the bulk of the neighborhood children. Just when the town had had enough, his little brother Raymond fell ill and died.
Oh.
For a while, the whole town kind of mourned this loss, but soon they used Raymond's name against Martin. So they would call him Raymond anytime he did anything instead of using his real name.
Oh.
This caused Martin to withdraw from those within the town, and he was only 4.
Oh, I was just going to ask, like, how old is he?
4. At the same time, both the Austrian and Italian empires wanted to keep France from becoming another powerful entity. The French Imperial Army did what they could, but the Austrian army soon planted its flag on French soil. Pierre was worried about this, in fear his identity would be found out. As a result, he packed his family and attempted to flee even further west to Italy, as they were not allied with Austria. They moved to Padua in northern Italy, but the Austrians had beat the family there. And he attempted to kind of stay under the radar as he moved into the city because he realized the family couldn't just back up without being found. But a nobleman was already in the city and within the army and recognized Pierre from an old painting that he had seen.
Oh, whoa. That's some Wayback Time stuff.
I know. The family was arrested until a person could be brought forth that could potentially possibly identify Pierre. And it was one of his old servants from Hungary who made the distance and identified him in about 60 seconds as Pierre de Mola.
Oh.
After Marie and Martin were interrogated, they were set free, realizing that they had not known of Pierre's true identity. They were dropped in the streets as beggars in a foreign country speaking a different language. In the same town square, Pierre himself was brought out. There, his limbs were bound and ropes tied to 4 horses.
Oh, no.
each in like one corner of the town square, and then a shot was fired and all 4 horses bolted. But the town square was small, and the horses didn't get up to much speed, so Pierre was basically just lifted from the ground, but not pulled apart. And instead, his joints gave out slowly, but
Oh
he remained intact and in the air.
my gosh.
hmm
If you could see my face right now.
hmm You're welcome. I brought it back. You know, I always bring the depraved cases.
Wow.
So the executioner got an axe, one that was typically used to cut firewood and as such was quite blunt.
Oh no.
At the same time, so unbeknownst to Marie, she's trying to figure out what's happening. She doesn't speak the language. She is just like, where's my husband? What is going on? So she propped up her 4-year-old son on her
Oh,
shoulders to see what was happening. He was lifted just in time to see the axe come down on Pierre, and then again and again until his limbs were amputated and Pierre finally met his end. After the show, the crowd left, save for Marie and Martin, who openly grieved, and especially so for Marie because she didn't realize what she had just exposed her son to
Oh my gosh.
until the crowd dispersed.
I just I'm glad we don't do things like that anymore.
Yeah, public executions like that?
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, we're a little more humane than that, I guess. So after this, they were basically run out of town in kind of disgrace.
I mean, even if you weren't run out of town in disgrace, you should run out of town at that point.
At that point, They walked back to France, but Marie was unable to function much of the time as she was basically in shock at the sudden loss of her husband. She wouldn't think to eat, let alone feed her 4-year-old.
Mm-mm.
So Martin was forced to fend for himself. He found he could catch rabbits with rocks, sticks, and sometimes his own hands. And they were able to survive, but it was pretty much just barely. As they passed through war zones, Martin looked to scavenging clothes and food items from dead soldiers in order to stay alive,
Oh my
clothing
gosh.
himself and Marie to keep the cold kind of away from them. And as they moved, the French forces believed them to be refugees and ended up taking care of them, kind of making them like mascots and helping them along the line and feeding them. By now, Martin was pretty much mute and just like a wild child. Like he didn't speak to people, and he would rather be out in the woods than in civilization. By the time Marie and Martin made it back to Marie's family, the family attempted to help, but there was little they could do. Marie was catatonic much of the time, and Martin again just roamed out in the woods rather than be with people.
It would take a really good psychologist to get this kid back to like a normal standard of life.
Yeah. At age 8, Martin was employed as a shepherd. Again, different times.
Right.
I saw the look.
I mean, he could do it.
Mm-hmm.
If any 8-year-old could do it, I believe Martin could be a shepherd.
Martin was the shepherd. In the pastures, he kept watch over sheep and survived on his own. He didn't come down, though, into the city without injuries. I guess, every time he started to come in, people were like, oh, that's a new scratch, that's a new injury, that's a new this or that. And it just sort of added to his overall kind of crazy, wild, inhuman look.
There was definitely the like rumor mills of this kid. Yeah.
In the winter, when the sheep were brought down, Martin would take odd jobs in the town to survive. And one time, while he was out up in the fields, his lip was split and it healed in a manner that made his lip look kind of permanently swollen on one side, which comes into play later, which is why I brought it up.
He's like the Joker.
It's not a Glasgow smile.
I know, but like he's got this like face scar that's
very prominent.
Very prominent.
I'll give you that. One winter, he fell from a hayloft when he was in town trying to work for money, and it left him injured and unable to work for days. However, he refused treatment and was back on his feet with pretty quickly it said, again, no treatment, and he ended up being hunched, and he lived in like constant pain after
Oh
this.
my God, he's like the Hunchback of Notre Dame.
I like that you're comparing him to everybody.
You're right, I
Oh
am.
my
All
goodness.
these characters.
Yes. The town attempted to take pity on him, and they did so in a way that didn't work for him, though, because what they did is they avoided giving him work that would cause him
Oh
pain,
no.
but this left him without money. Um, and so the town realized that slowly items started going missing.
I was going to say, it also left him bored, probably.
Mhm. And by the time law was eventually involved, Martin had fled the area. He continued moving, finding odd jobs on like farms and other manual labor. Eventually, he found the master of the castle of Shur and was recommended, like the master was recommended Martin by those who had worked for him or worked with him in previous years and saw how hard he was. And he moved to Saint Andre de Courcy, which was far away from where he had been. The master of the house, Guichard, took in Martin and thought that he looked wild, and he looked too wild to like be in the house as a house servant. So instead, he had him in charge of tending the animals.
I was going to say, they put
And
him in the barn.
and he also marked out hunting trails for hunting parties, and he made a corner of the barn his own.
Yep.
And
Nice little hay bed.
the owner of the castle thought that he did like a wonderful job. He very much loved doing like he would muck out, the stalls, and he would do everything and never complain, never anything. Like that was his realm.
Okay.
He did very well.
If you ever employed anyone and they slept in the barn, then you better be saying they're doing a wonderful job.
Yes.
Like,
The butler also noticed this and was impressed by Martin, how he took his job seriously. And slowly the staff members sort of took pity on him because at first they were like, what is this guy? He's in the barn, he's weird, we're not doing anything with him. And slowly they tried to invite him to supper, and he thought he had to go. So he did, but he wouldn't talk to anybody. He just kind of like sat in the corner and would like eat and leave.
oh my gosh.
And eventually the staff were like, well, we tried. So that's that, So they were not mean or anything to him, but they just kind of let him be in peace. However, one woman, Marie Anne Martinet, took interest in him. She found him to be mysterious.
Yeah.
And she was the type of woman that she was going to get what she wanted, basically.
Yeah.
So she basically went to him and started this courtship between the two. They would hold hands and they would kiss and they would stroll in the forest and all these little things. It said that he was like this rough and tumble kind of guy, but he would hold her hand very softly and walk with her and slow down because he's so used to the woods that he can just traverse as if he's part of the nature.
Right.
And he would slow down and walk with her, and for years they did this.
I love a woman that knows what she wants and just says, screw it, I'm going to go get that.
You say that now.
I know.
Marie Anne also took over speaking for Martin in his silence, and he didn't seem to bother him. Like, he's just like, okay, yep, that's like, she would answer for him, and he was very much like, oh, good, I don't have to do the talking. Like, she's gonna say what we're gonna say.
Yeah. Whatever she says, I agree with.
As their courtship neared about a decade, Marie Anne, let Martin know it was time for him to propose. He did as he was told, and the pair married at a local chapel on June 29th, 1840. Guichard sent them off with a small sum of money in order to help them find their place in the world.
Oh.
It's cute, except there's like multiple sources that say that they also stole like some of their like kitchen, like the silver and stuff like that on their way out. And so they took off because they thought that they were going to get in trouble. And Guichard was like, that's adorable, and I'm not going to send anybody after such a small, like, like this pittance compared to what he has. He was just like, just let him be. They clearly thought they needed it.
Right. I mean, I don't knock him for that either.
Yeah. So the couple headed east, stopping in the commune of Les Montiers in Aisne.
That sounded great.
No, it didn't. They bought a cottage and spent basically a lazy honeymoon, but soon it was clear Martin needed to go back to work if they wanted to keep living in the cottage.
Uh-huh.
He tried fishing and other trades that the village needed, but he basically sucked at everything.
Really?
Yeah, it was terrible. Martin attempted to work odd jobs, but the pay wasn't enough to keep the two afloat because Marie Anne definitely wanted to be a housewife. She
Mm,
herself also discovered she didn't have much in the way of skills, anything beyond what she was taught to do in the castle. They're taught to do this one,
right,
like, this is your role, and
right.
that was all she could
She
do.
could dust the candlesticks.
Hmm.
Yeah.
And as she realized that, their savings dwindled to basically nothing. Martin received even more bad news at this time. His mother died on April 15th, 1842, in Dagno. The couple then sold their house, realizing they had nothing left, and headed for Dagno. Again, that's kind of where his family is.
Mm-hmm.
There, they bought a small place that they could settle into and basically were just quiet. They're like, let's not make this big scene about getting a big cottage and
Right.
doing all this stuff. Like, we're just going to get this little place and we're going.
We can live
We can do this.
simply.
Hmm. The town had entirely forgotten about him when he was a child, though they couldn't remember his actual name as a result. Instead, they continued calling him Raymond, and
Oh,
Martin never corrected the town, so they all thought he was Raymond.
I'm sort of shocked that his wife didn't.
Yeah, I know.
She seems like the
Uh,
type of woman who'd be like, no,
this is
this is
Martin.
Martin.
What is wrong with
Yeah.
you? Yeah. Yeah, I don't know how that went out.
Although maybe it served her because they could steal
Yeah,
or
do what they
whatever.
want.
Like, yeah, gave them sort of a cover.
Still, they weren't able to find much work in this town either, so Martin told his wife he was going to the city of Lyon for work. Instead of going there, he took to becoming a highwayman. And so a highwayman at the time is somebody who's like a robber, like a
Hmm.
highway
Okay.
robber. But the roads were moderately dangerous, and so most people who traveled the area already carried weapons, and Martin had sticks and
Oh,
rocks and
no,
was
Martin.
basically mocked and made fun of. And at one point, he tried to rob this man, and the man beat the crap out of him.
Yeah. I mean,
And so he
if
realized,
someone came up to me with a stick in their hand
yeah.
and I knew I was stronger than them, I would laugh and probably beat the crap out
Hmm.
of them.
And so he decided that he needed to ambush people. But even then, he barely made enough to get through a week. And he continued traveling the roads and robbing people. Again, the amount was never enough. So Marie Anne sold her dresses in order to make enough to live where they were living, realizing that the dresses were worth money and that robbing men was too difficult. Maybe robbing women would be easier.
Mm.
So Martin hatched a plan. He attacked a young woman who traveled between the villages of the commune of Montluel and Lyon, and he stripped her of her clothes, bonnet, dress, and undergarments, selling them in a nearby village and bringing home the money to his wife.
That's pretty smart.
I know. I know.
I mean, not okay, but
Mhm.
it's a good pivot
Yeah,
that I don't think a lot of men would think.
maybe. I mean, it's a bad pivot.
Yeah, it's a bad pivot, but it was a
Smart.
business-minded pivot
Yeah,
that
yeah,
made a lot of sense.
that makes sense. Mm. By all accounts, he could not keep the secret from how he made this money from his wife, however. So he told her everything that he had done. And instead of her being upset with him, she basically like went piece by piece of like, this is what you did wrong. This is what you did right.
Mhm.
This is what you need to do better next
Next
time.
time.
And so she even told him how to get more victims.
Yeah.
So this is from multiple sources. Again, this is 1800s love it all. So from there, his victims began to pile up. Marie Bidet was the first one. She was picked up, don't even, with the last name.
Sorry, I just think she probably had some very expensive clothes.
You're a horrible liar. So she was picked up In February of 1855 in Lyon, she had recently lost her job, and along came Martin. He acted as though he had a job to offer, like he had a master of a house and he was the errand boy, basically. And he packed around her large trunk as the two of them left the city walking. A group of hunters found her body a week later.
Oh, no.
Yeah, laugh now, Sam.
He killed her.
She had been bludgeoned to death. And for months, her identification was unknown, so Magistrate Janod brought out Lyonnaise, a photographer, Camille Barnaby, I think, to take photographs of the victim. They're a famous photographer of the time. That's all I know. Even so, she was misidentified as Marceline Ganelli, and eventually Marie's family came forward after seeing the photograph and was able to positively identify the woman as Marie. In this case, 2 other men were suspected of her murder to begin with. The first suspect was a man named, with these names, I'm sorry, Jacques Verger, who was arrested and remained in prison for 3 months before being exonerated and released.
God, that'd be so infuriating.
The second suspect, Martin Marriott, was suspected of this crime. However, when they were looking back at everything, they realized he was in prison at the time, so he was not the one.
Wrong Martin.
Meanwhile, our Martin was back in Lyon on February 25th, 1855. There he found Olympe Alubert, who worked as a servant, but with far less pay than Martin was purporting that his employer was willing to give. It wasn't until March that she agreed to change position, and the two walked out of the city and chatted about many things. But Martin kept looping the conversation kind of back to money over and over again, and this made Olympe uneasy. And as the sun began to set, she kind of demanded that they needed to stop at a local farmhouse for the evening. You know, they needed to take shelter. This is a dangerous road, all that. And Martin kind of argued with her and was like, no, we don't. We're almost there. And Olympe just took off. She was like, nope, absolutely not. Martin grabbed a rock and threw it, hitting her in the back. Still, she managed to continue running, even as more and more, like he was just chucking things at her direction.
He, hunts them like he did his rabbits.
Yep. Olympe made it to the closest farm, being brought in by the wife, and they listened to her story and kept her safe overnight. When the sun came up, a group of farmers took her back to Lyon, where she relayed her story to Magistrate Janod. And we'll hear this time and time again, where the local farmers definitely take in these women and help and protect. And it's adorable in its own right, but sad that they had to.
Right.
It is believed that Martin learned from his mistake this time and took to burying bodies and selling items immediately. That's what they thought. Until he met Joseph Charletti, who worked at Vernayson there in the town's market. She met him while he was shopping for his master, while Martin was. And on September 22nd, 1855, the pair set off together. So he had again talked her into this higher level of pay. It's going to be better here. It's out in this area.
It's pretty, impressive that he's able to do that, because I'm envisioning what this man looks like.
Oh, he looks like a Neanderthal.
Yeah, he's hunched over. He's got this busted up lip. He's just aged poorly, I imagine. He doesn't have money to try to even make the rest of his life look okay.
He really does, when there's a couple photos, and most of them are drawings of what he would look like, and it really does look like the stereotypical, this is a Neanderthal.
Right.
That's his face. I'm like, oh, that's very strange.
It's just impressive that he was able to convince these women to go on a road alone with him and walk to a place that they had no idea where they were walking to. It's incredible.
Yeah. And when I envision, as you're reading all these reports about him and he's this wild child, I just picture his hair always being out and he has this unkempt beard and just all these patchy clothes, and he's like, come with me.
Yeah, and his head is tilted down and he has to look up at you with his eyes and can't make true eye contact. Yeah.
It's not quite the case, but that's what I pictured the entire time. So again, on September 22nd, 1855, the pair set off together. And again, Martin carried her large trunk as they walked out of town. The conversation once again kept rounding back to money, and this began to concern Joseph. So she said they needed again to stop for the night. She's like, nope, this is sketch. We can't do this.
He's not doing a very good job learning that part of his little act.
Well, this time, so she basically was like, we can't do this. And she went to a local farmhouse to spend the night. And Martin was like, okay, I'll meet you in the morning. And so then she gets to this farmhouse and she's talking to the farmer. And they're like, that's weird. That sounds like he meant to rob you, not that,
Right.
or do worse than just rob you. So in the morning, she went out to the road and Martin was gone.
Of course.
And it was then that she realized he had all of her stuff.
Oh.
He had the pack. He had everything. So he just took off. And so she went to the local magistrate and relayed her story about kind of what had happened.
Did the magistrate say you're an idiot?
Different times, probably not.
I know.
Probably not. In October of 1855, Martin was in Lyon again, setting off on the 31st with Jean Marie Burgoy in tow, I believe. I don't know if the S is silent or not. But again, his attitude made her suspicious. As they made it to Mionnet, she let her worry take over, running to a monastery of Paulatins looking for shelter. And she ran until she was basically exhausted. And a local farmer kind of saw this all happening and he walked over and was like, are you okay? And it was Benoit Berthelier. That's a heck of a name.
That is.
She told her tale, and at the end, he brought her to his farmhouse and then gathered up local men and attempted to find Martin because they were like, that sounds suspicious.
Yeah.
But Martin, again, was already gone. So Jean Marie was brought to the local magistrate. Again, this is Magistrate Janad. It's not always Janad because he's not always in the same city, but it is a lot, and he starts to put it together. The next victim was Victorine Perrin, who was passing through Lyon when Martin found her on November of 1855. He took her luggage as they walked down the same route as his previous victims, and by the time they arrived to the village of Rilou, the two were separated in a crowd of people. And so she attempted to call after Martin and then waited for him. She was very lucky and naive.
They all are very naive.
And it took her a while to realize that he had taken all of her possessions and money, and she returned to Lyon alone and spoke with officers of the court about the event that had kind of transpired. And I believe she was the one that was told, that was very lucky.
Right.
That he just lost you in the crowd. Right. And he didn't come searching for you.
Because he was going to take your stuff one way or another. So you're lucky he did it this way.
Julie Fargett had fallen pregnant and was cast out of her previous assignment as a chambermaid. Martin gave his offer, and before departing, Julie even told Martin that she was expecting a child and kind of expected him to be like, cool, we don't want you. But according to her, he did not. Instead, the two walked off January 17th, 1859. And they passed through Siveru commune, and the sun began to set, and Julie felt Martin's arm wrap around her instead of waiting for anything. And so she started screaming, and I guess this caught Martin by surprise, and he jumped away from her. So she just continued just screaming nonstop. And Martin lunged at her, ripping off her apron, and then took off running. And she realized the apron contained all of the money in her life, including what her previous employer had given her for hush money.
Oh, for hush money?
Yeah, because pregnancy.
From
previous employer.
Oh, boy.
She continued to scream until a farmer and his son, Simon Maller, and Lewis, I can talk, came out of the fields. She was brought to the city where she could sleep safely, and then at dawn was brought to Saint Andre de Courcy to make her report.
Man, there's a lot of potential for lost life here, and he hasn't killed all of these women.
No, not all these.
A lot A lot of women escaped him.
Mm-hmm.
Is he on the same road?
I think sometimes he is, but not all of the time.
Okay. I'm like, he's really risking it, letting all these eyewitnesses go. Like,
It happens later that he is on the same road and somebody gets away and people recognize him
of
from
course.
previous times.
Yeah.
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 But I don't think it's all the same road.
Okay.
On December 11th, 1859, Jean-Pierre Chrétien, a miller, watched as a large man with a chest walked with a woman, and that evening he saw that same woman come running back, bruised and bloodied, explaining to him how this man had beaten her.
Mm.
And she remained a Jane Doe. She's not identified. In some reports, it says that, he was like, all right, well, in the morning, we're going to go talk to the magistrate. And she basically was like, hell no, and took off. Like, she wanted no part of that.
Yeah. I feel like I'm shocked that all of these women did go talk to the magistrate. Like,
I'm sure there were plenty more that didn't.
right. They seem so like they're desperate women,
Mhm.
right? You're gonna walk. Like, I just can't even get over the mindset of like you've got your little trunk and you're gonna be walking the countryside to go
Mm-hmm.
to this new potential job.
Yeah.
But
Different times again.
yeah, I
Yeah.
know.
In April 1860, Louise Michel went off with Martin on the Tilsit Bridge, loading her belongings on a horse that he had brought with him this time. And the pair traveled towards Cerveau, where he stopped for a moment and asked her kind of to dismount. And I guess they had been chatting enough that nothing fell off. So she kind of slid down and was taken aback when Martin told her to hand him all her money, lest he kill her. He's like, I'm gonna kill you if I don't get what I want.
He's moving up in the world now, though. He has a horse.
Yeah. And then Martin struck her, and out of terror, she took off. And again, another farmer found her, and she relayed her story. These farmers, man,
I know.
they're doing wonderfully. Martin seemed to get cocky at this point. By the end of the month, he was prowling again, finding Marie Pichon at the Guillotine Bridge in Lyon in May 26, 1861. Promising 250 francs a year for a job in Dagno, which again is his actual town. So he actually lived there, and he met with Marie, and they took the train out of Lyon to Montluel. From there, they started heading to the estate, and Martin declared the work was at, and along the road he stopped to quote unquote tie his shoe, unloading her trunk from his back and pulling out a lasso he had hidden in his pant leg. He came up behind her, but for her luck, she moved entirely unaware of Martin, and it sounds like she put her arm up to do something like with her hair or with her face, and the lasso caught her arm instead of going around her neck. And so he began to wrestle her, and the lasso slowly loosened as she was fighting him, and she was eventually freed from this, taking flight as soon as her feet kind of hit the ground from this fight. And she ran to the region of Ballon and Jolly Farm. While she stayed the night there, the master of the house went and found a local guard in Dagno to report the crime, in which a man with a scar on his lip that created a swollen look and a crooked back had attacked this woman.
There you go.
After some investigations, rangers were sent to check in on a cottage of the Dumollards because he met that description.
That's the classic definition of you don't shit where you eat.
Yes. They also sent word to Magistrate Janad about the findings of this local area and what had happened, and so now he's matching it with all the stories he have of these women. Because they had matched all these strings of events, and he knew. So he sent out a warrant for Raymond, aka Martin Dumollard, following along with officers of the court. So he's like, yep, I'm coming too. Both Martin and his wife were arrested on June 2nd, 1861, and taken in while Janad and the officers searched the couple's house for evidence.
Oh, they must have found so much evidence.
You ready?
Yeah.
Inside, there were mounds of clothes. Some were as high as the ceiling, and the piles were in 3 distinct areas. One was clean, folded items. The other was dirtied items, and the third was torn up. So the result of a struggle. Some of them had blood on them. A lot of them were also very dirty. It was clear Martin had many more victims than the single deceased girl and the numerous of escaped
Right.
victims. In other areas of the house, jewelry and other valuables were found. In all, the investigators found 1,250 women's clothing pieces belonging to victims. And this is what they haven't sold yet. So
Right.
remember, they're selling these
I know.
items to live off of. So this is what's found that's not been able to be sold off yet.
Did they ever move? Or were they living in the same
Mm-mm.
spot?
Little same spot. Back in prison in Travois, Martin maintained his silence while his wife blamed Martin for everything.
Oh, I mean, she's the one who talks.
Yeah. She believed that the clothing came from a rag and bone dealer, which would explain the blood, which to me sounds like I couldn't find exactly what it is, but it sounds like a mortician. Like they're like, all right, well, these are off the deceased,
Uh-huh.
but I was like, I'm pretty sure they would have sold them at this time, but that's what it sounds like.
Okay, that's crazy. There is a secondhand store that I used to go to called Rag and Bone.
Well, there you go.
And I'm now like, is that the
Maybe.
name of like what it used to be when you would buy clothes from like, oh
Maybe,
my God. Okay, I'm gonna have to
maybe
look
that's a
into
nod
that.
to that. Yeah.
I'm gonna have to look into that. That's crazy.
The word was sent out that there were items needed to be identified for potential missing persons. So basically, they're sending like,
Right.
do you have anybody that's missing? Do you know what they were wearing? Maybe.
Or a special piece of jewelry they owned, or yeah.
Mm-hmm. An innkeeper's wife was the first to come forward, and she brought a story about a girl who he claimed at one point to be his niece when they stayed at the inn in February of 1860. But in the night, she attempted to run off, and he left the inn after her and came back a while later all by himself. The lady, the innkeeper's wife, identified the dress the girl ran off in as being amongst the piles of clothes.
Mhm.
The sister of Marie Joseph, Marie Eulalie, reported her missing in May of 1861. She came in and identified Marie Joseph's clothing and Martin himself as the man that she walked away with the day that she went missing.
Yeah, I mean, he's just so distinctive too. Like,
For days, they searched the area that she went missing, and then Janad paid a visit to Martin, who finally spoke, telling them he remembered where she was buried. And I guess he actually took him to the location, walked into the woods, and was like, right there.
wow.
And they found her grave where she had been raped, beaten, and buried alive.
Oh my God.
Mm-hmm. Janad believed Martin's wife to be more culpable than she had reported, so he kind of went in and questioned her multiple times. And she kept trying to tell stories that would incriminate Janad or incriminate Martin, but not herself. And she ended up incriminating herself
I'm sure.
many, many times. So she told Janad that in 1957, Martin killed a girl in Montmain Woods. She was able to walk them to the exact spot where that woman was buried.
Oh, well, it's
And
pretty impressive for someone who has their hands clean, I feel like.
again, Janad thought it unlikely she'd be able to do so without having to been, like, she
Right.
would have had to have been there.
Right.
And Martin refuted knowledge of this killing. He's like, I don't know what she's talking about.
Oh.
But she was believed to have been raped prior to the murder, so
Mhm.
they think that it still was him. This led to their third confirmed murder. So Marie Bidet, Marie Eulalie Boussard, and the Jane Doe of Montmain, so they weren't able to identify her.
It's interesting that he was raping them.
It doesn't happen all the time, but it does happen a few times.
Yeah, it just seems like a layer of just something different. It goes beyond what the initial
Mhm.
need was. Like he was evolving as he did it,
I
or
think he was devolving.
or
But yeah,
devolving. Yeah, that's
Yeah.
probably true. It's definitely a more accurate
yeah.
word for that scenario.
All right, and 12 other women had claims with evidence of attempted rape, murder, and robbery. In the time that Martin was active, 648 women were reported missing, and yet no others could be identified.
Whoa.
So we're not saying he had to
Right.
do with
That he had
everything,
to.
but that's a huge number.
It's a huge number.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I guess, hold on. So he was active from like, I'm going to say 55 to
mhm.
like 61?
60, yeah.
Okay.
Hmm.
So 6 years of missing women in a vast area, I would
I don't
imagine,
think it was
too.
that big of an area.
Okay.
And I think they kept it to where, like, most of the other women
We're
were
had
either reported missing or not reported as missing, excuse me, were attacked or where the
right.
dead bodies were. So
Okay.
I think they kind of confined it to that
Yeah.
area, not like a region.
Right. Okay.
Martin attempted to absolve himself of his crimes, stating that a family got him drunk on wine and promised him large sums of money for bringing them girls. He did as he was told and was unaware at first that the girls were being killed. That was until he overheard them talking about dropping bodies under a bridge. And then one day,
Oh,
the family was just gone and done with him. Meanwhile, his wife continued to blame him, trying to make herself sound unaware, but in doing so implicated Martin for a further 18 murders.
wow.
Hmm. So after all of the evidence was put together by Janad, trial began on January 29th, 1862, with both Martin and his wife standing trial. They faced a jury of 36. And I
Whoa.
don't know the standards of their laws and how they did things and how it's changed, but that's what it said, that there was a jury of 36 people. I was like, that is a lot.
That's a
That's a lot of
that's a
people.
lot of people. Like, do you just have to get the majority? It's definitely not like you
Yeah,
have to get everyone to agree. That would
I have
never happen.
no idea. While Janad was unable to match crimes with all of the clothing and items within the home, the couple faced 9 attempted murder and 3 murder charges, so 12 in all. So that's what they faced. The 12 victims were Marie Bidet, murdered at the end of February 1855, Olympe Alubert, March 4th, 1855, Joseph Charletti, September 22nd, 1855, Jean Marie Burgoy, October 31st, 1855, Victorian Perrin, November 1855, and the unidentified woman in the woods of Montmain who was murdered November or December of 1855, Julie Fargett, January 18th, 1859, the unidentified woman in St. Croix Mill, December 11th, 1859, the Laborde daughter at the inn in February of 1860, Louise Michel, April 30th, 1860, and Marie Eulalie Boussard, murdered February 25th or 26th, 1861, and Marie Pichon, attempted murder May 26th, 1861. So those are the ones that we know of.
I was gonna say, so there's like the gap of the end of or not 1955,
1855.
1855 to 1850 or yeah, 59 as the next one. So there's
Mhm.
4 years in there
Mhm.
that they clearly were operating.
Mhm.
Um, and you're not gonna start with like murder, 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 and then just decide, "Oh, you know what, let's not murder anyone. And then a few years down the line, let's just start doing that again.
Yeah.
Like 100%, a lot of those women were
Yeah.
dead
Well,
at the
there's a
hands of
lot of
them.
clothing that suggests it, and
Yeah,
I'm sure the magistrate was just pulling his hair out trying to attach like these items of clothing and
right,
the jewelry and things, the valuable things with people to see if they could get more,
right.
find out who these women were, but that was as far as they could get.
Hmm.
So 2 lawyers defended the Dumollards, Marius Larder and Mr. Villeneuve. So Marius was specifically chosen by Martin, who wrote to him requesting to be his representation because he was from the town of Dagno. The first day, the couple themselves were interrogated on the stand. The second and third day, 71 witnesses were called forward. Then doctors discussed the rapes and how one of the victims was again buried alive. In addition, all the evidence, such as clothing and jewelry, were presented, so each piece was like
Hmm.
brought forward. The last day was evidentiary hearing and indictments, along with the pleadings of both sides. And finally, when both sides were arrested, the jury departed to determine the outcome of the trial. So this only took 4 days to get through. It's not like modern where they're like weeks or months. They're like, this is what happened. These are the witnesses. We're done. Like,
Right,
go decide what's going
right.
to happen. which is insane to me. That's so fast.
It is, especially when you have that many victims.
And it took the jury just 2.5 hours to come back.
It wouldn't take long at all.
In the end, Martin was convicted of 67 major crimes, and Marie Anne's charges were reduced, but both were found guilty of the crimes.
Mhm.
The resulting punishment was death for Martin and 26 years of hard labor for Marie Anne. And in the decision, so they did come back like 2.5 hours later, but there's a bunch of reports that say for each little thing, the judge was like, there was like subsets or things that weren't answered. So, yep, they found him guilty, but then they had to go through each one of these and they're like, what about this portion or this portion? Or this?
Right.
And I've never seen anything like that before, so I'm not going to get into the detail because I can't speak to explaining why it happened that way. Just know that it took a lot longer than the 2.5 hours before they were finally finished with everything. Martin appealed the decision, but that was denied on March 7th, and he was headed to the guillotine. When asked about this version of death, he simply said, quote, better than being ripped up by horses, end quote.
Oh.
He also refused to get, so I guess he was supposed to ride a horse up to the guillotine, and he refused. He's like, no, I'll walk. And so I was like, wow, that shows the trauma from, age 4 all the way up. He's like, yeah, no, I'm not doing it. I mean, he did ride a horse in one of these accounts, but he wasn't going willingly with a horse to his death.
I mean, it's sort of shocking to me that that's reported that he said that. Like, feels like something that you would just put away. Like, and you might not even know that your brain remembers it, but it's just in there. And
so his last words were also reported. And his last words after being led to the guillotine were, quote, God pray for me, Marie, end quote. So he's talking to his wife. After this, Madame Tussaud's Chamber of Horrors had the skin of his head on display for years. So you know how they used to do like the death masks? They didn't have his death mask. They had his face, the actual skin of his face.
Whoa.
And they put it on display.
That's
there's pictures
disgusting.
It's the Chamber of Horrors, man. I would go.
Oh my God.
As for Marie Anne, her health failed rapidly as soon as she was sentenced to hard labor.
Lucky for her.
She was in the Auberive, maybe, prison, where she was sick shortly after her arrival. I mean, it sounds like it was pretty poor conditions and definitely was hard labor. But by the time it hit 1875, she died in her sleep, being found the next morning by guards. Like they went to wake her for work and she was gone. And that is the case of Martin.
Okay. So one, I can't believe he ever tried to appeal that. It seems like so silly.
Yeah. I think it was for the death, not for like, I didn't do everything.
Right. Okay.
It was maybe the death sentence itself.
Yeah. And then I feel like if I were to have ever just seen, I know they probably don't have bank statements per se, but like if you could just show me any type of record or like wherever she was selling these clothes at, like there had to have been like her 5 pawn shops, which I know they weren't called pawn shops then, but like in the area that she went to, like the second I would hear about the amount of money they were making, I would love to know how much money they made over that amount.
I would love to know, but I don't think that we'll ever know. I don't think they gave anything like that.
They probably didn't have they weren't keeping books, right? Like,
no,
they're not going to be like keeping their records, but I bet you they made a good amount of money.
They do sound like they had a process though, because when they found they had the 3 piles. And so clearly she was cleaning and then they'd fold the clothes and then take them in. And so I wonder, because, they talk about the clothes that were in the pile that were all ripped up. I was like, I wonder if she tried to repair those or clean them. Or if they eventually, like, why else would you hang on to them?
I bet you she was
not
trying to repair them. Yeah.
For more money.
Yeah.
But the amount of pile up, I was like, well, yeah, that makes sense. You can't take them all in all at one time and be like, here's all these clothes of different sizes. And, definitely different. Like, this is probably better quality than this. And but here they all are at one time.
I know.
Not suspicious.
I know. It's really interesting. You would have had to have a legit, like, pretty good operation going. Because Yeah, you could maybe make up a story to one spot and say, I work for this person in the village, and she always just gives me the hand-me-downs of her girls like that.
Mm-hmm.
Tells me to get rid of them, and I bring her back the money or whatever. But like the second you bring something in that's of lesser quality or like something uncharacteristic of that family that she's
Mm-hmm.
saying she works for, you would be like, what is this?
Yeah.
Like, I don't know. You'd have to be pretty quick on your feet, I feel like, to be able to sell all those clothes to
Mm-hmm.
not like have some alarm bells ring in like a smaller community, it sounds like.
Yeah.
Smallish.
Yeah. I wonder if I'm sure they went outside of the
They had to
village
have.
if they were flying on the radar
Yeah.
and nobody was like, this is weird
Yeah.
beforehand. So it makes me think that she would travel outside of the area while he was stalking
Yeah.
his victims.
She probably took all the money, bought herself a nice little horse and buggy, and drove to Paris. Or wherever. To sell her clothes.
No.
Hmm.
In any case, they're gone now.
They are?
Yep.
Yep.
All right. Well, to all those out there listening, be careful. It's a dangerous world we live in.